Hey everyone, it's Irene Lyon here. I'm tuning in again. This is our third mini lecture this week. Just to give a shout out to what is occurring, time sensitive, and I'll do a little housekeeping before I get started with today's mini lecture, which is all on mental health and addiction in relationship to my 12-week curriculum, Smart Body, Smart Mind. So we're doing a lot of these little mini lectures this week to help all of you who are interested in working with me understand how this stuff works, why it works, how this connects to the nervous system, how it connects to stored trauma, adversity, abuse, and really what it means to tap into the neuroplasticity within our physiology and nervous system and brains, and how we connect to the environment and how we can heal and, as we like to say, become our own medicine. So I know that there'll be a lot of conversation and a lot of questions in the chat. So we will get into questions after I do. I'm not going to go too long with the theory. What I would recommend, if you are new here and you haven't watched the previous two mini lectures, one was on Tuesday. Nope, it was Wednesday. I'm losing track of time. Wednesday, where I talked about here on YouTube, introception and integration. And we can pop those links in the chat. So I did a YouTube live on why learning about and becoming better at introception, this is our perception of our internal environment, and learning how to integrate. These are two key ingredients. It's like salt and pepper for mashed potatoes, right? You need to have certain key ingredients to make food taste good. When it comes to working with our nervous system, healing trauma, recovering from chronic illness, mental illness, shock traumas, all these things that we as humans live with and survive, we have to have these two ingredients of introception and integration. So I get into that which happened on Wednesday. The second one was yesterday, and I dove into chronic illness, chronic pain, and how that connects to, again, our nervous system, our physiology. I did as quick as I could, overview of something called the polyvagal theory. This is a new way of understanding our autonomic nervous system physiology, which was researched and founded via Stephen Porges, and no doubt his academic team, and probably many grad students. So the polyvagal theory I go over on the talk yesterday. And it's so important because we need to understand these branches. This work is not as simple as here, follow these instructions, do them for 10 days, and then come back and we'll give you another set of instructions. We need to integrate the learning and the understanding into the practices. So those were 2 days ago. So yesterday, the day before. They will inform what I'm going to speak about today. In other words, I don't want to repeat that theory, but I'll do my best to give little snippets of what I was talking about in those 2 days to facilitate today's call. I will take questions, so please put your questions in the chat. I will do my best to get to as many as I can. What you will find as you hear me talk about the answers to your questions, there's going to be a lot of repeat. And the reason why, and I'll just start with an overarching analogy. If we have a crop, so I'm going to pull a analogy from agriculture. If we have a crop of food that's, say, monocropped, I did an article on this a while ago. It might be a video. We can post it here too as well. We know now that monocropping fields ain't the best for the environment, for the earth, the dirt, the critters, the microorganisms. Of course, to monocrop, you need to use pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and all these things to kill off the good stuff that creates healthy, mineral-rich soil to grow very, very nutrient-dense, mineral-rich vegetables and crops. Our human system is the same way. So clearly, we can't feed our system one thing. We need to feed it many, many things. And it's the same with healing. So when we're working with mental illness, chronic illness, addictions, we have to, and I know this has been said over and over again, and I think all of you know this, you've heard this before, you have to treat the whole person. You can't just treat the one body part. You can't just treat the brain. You can't just treat the gut. You can't just treat the tightness in one muscle. Really good health practice, really good medical practice, really good holistic practice looks at the entire system. And the beauty of working directly with the autonomic nervous system, and that is exactly what we do in Smart Body, Smart Mind. Again, that's the 12-week program that we're in registration for right now. I'll just throw a date out. We open registration. We opened on Tuesday, and it will be open until this coming Tuesday, September 10th. So you've got that quite a bit of time still to learn, ask questions, and enroll and become a member. So we need to look at this whole system, and that is exactly what Smart Body, Smart Mind does. It is not just theory, and it is not just exercise. It is all of those things put together, working with the nervous system physiology, connecting with the environment, and of course there is support within this program. So I wanted to start with just a little bit of a parallel to what we see in the world. Don't forget, we are nature as well. We're living, breathing organisms, so we need all these pieces. We need to treat the system holistically. Okay, thank you also to my team who are popping links in here. We will keep adding the Smart Body, Smart Mind link to the chat. I know yesterday people were having trouble finding it. So if you're able to listen to my talk and also go into that site and peruse them talking, please do so. The other thing, we have a very substantial FAQ, frequently asked questions page on the site. And I'm actually going to start by reading that and also quoting something, and then we'll get into some of the theory as to how regulating our nervous system and how SBSM, Smart Body, Smart Mind, connects to this ability to heal what we might call mental illness and addiction. And I've done many videos on this in the past, so we're going to condense this. Okay, so this is a quote that or not really a quote, it's a passage from one of my books that I constantly recite from, and it's here. I showed it yesterday on the call. So this is The Trauma Spectrum, Hidden Wounds and Human Resiliency by Robert Scaer. He was a medical doctor, and he's passed. I just found out that he died a couple of years ago, and he was deeply in collaboration with Peter Levine, the founder of Somatic Experiencing, which is one of the things I am trained in. That is one of the best books that breaks down chronic illness, syndromes, and mental health disorders that I've ever seen. So I really recommend it. It's theory-based, so there's no practices. It's just an encyclopedia of what we're seeing to be proven to be true via the research that we're seeing out in the world, specifically the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which I probably will quote at some point today. So in this book, on page 122, under psychiatric disorders, he writes, and he's quoting other research, dysregulation, nervous system dysregulation, is the fundamental mechanism of all psychiatric disorders, period. This is a piece of research done by Taylor et al. And others in Shore's book, where it really is a research paper. And I just found it. It's super easy to find on PubMed. You just type in Taylor et al. Shore, Schore, 2002, and that'll pop up. And it really, I read the overview and the abstract and the conclusion earlier, and it's basically saying exactly this. When we have had early adversity, lack of attunement, disorganized attachment with our primary caregivers, it throws our nervous system into a tailspin. And the result is a human, a little person, an infant, a toddler, a child, a teen, and then an adult who has, and I went into this yesterday, this cocktail of survival stress physiology running the show of the body. Yesterday, I talked more so about chronic illness and how it impacts the physiology. I'll touch into that a little bit. So when we have an autonomic nervous system that is front-facing, always with survival stress, maybe it's a dangerous environment we're living in, war, natural disaster, constantly, continually. Maybe our parents, our caregivers are abusive. That's a given, whether it's physical, verbal, emotional, sexual. That impacts us. It is a constant and chronic threat. It also happens if we're treated well, but let's say our parents can't stand each other. They're always fighting. Or maybe we have a single parent, one parent raising us, and they are struggling with some form of mental illness, chronic illness. They are not regulated. We as little people are sponges, and we learn how to regulate our system based on that of which we see, those around us. And some of the most compelling stories when I was in private practice, I'm not anymore, but I was for over a decade plus, would be my clients who would give me these stories. They would come in due to chronic illness, mental illnesses, insomnia, addiction, all sorts of things. Relational problems were very common. And they would tell these stories about being with friends. And I'll tell this one story. It always has stuck with me. I was working with someone. I don't remember what the purpose was, what we were working on that day, but there was nervous system dysregulation. And we were tuning into some deep, deep attachment wounds, some deep, deep misattunement from her primary caregivers. And she said, I knew something wasn't right when I was a little girl and I was playing with a friend of a family, and we found something in the forest. And my friend, the girl I was with, said, oh my goodness, let's go show our parents. They're going to love to see this. Like, I want to share it with them. So here is a little person who finds something, is excited, and wants to connect. So make note of this word, connect, with their primary caregiver and offer them just what they found. It's joy, it's surprise, it's happiness, it's connection. My client, who was an adult at the time, remembers this story, and she looked at the girl and she said, but the adults don't care about us. Why would we show this to them? She had never experienced that thrill, that interest, that wanting to run and go, mommy, mommy, look at this. And then the mother, of course, going, wow, look at that. Where did you find that? What it is. This is what teaches us when we're young how to be connected to self, the world, how to find wonder, how to be curious, how to have relationship. So if you take this client of mine, and every single day of her life, she senses and feels there's no interest in her being, in her soul journey, in what she's learning at school, in the mistakes she's making, all these things, that creates a system that is essentially over time living in what we would call collapse. The functional physiology term is shutdown of the nervous system. Before that, there will be the fight, flight, and the freeze. And I remember this person, she had a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry, a lot of, it's almost like she was walking on eggshells. So we'll speak to that. When we grow up in an environment where we are walking on eggshells, again, because parents are fighting, maybe there's strictness in the house, for whatever reason, we will never fully find our true individuality and authenticity. We will keep it wrapped up and hidden. But underneath is this desire to share, this desire to speak up, to be rambunctious, to do that little dance and play, right? So this is why I want to say the way in which we end up with what we would call, quote unquote, these mental disorders, which, as I just said, quoting Scaer from Shore, that these mechanisms of psychiatric disorders are fundamentally rooted in nervous system dysregulation. That's the story. This client of mine, she never had a good start to gain that trust of self, but also self in relationship to others. And then over time, we just sort of we lose our life force energy, we lose our spark, we start to feel shame around our own physiology, around our own creations, all these things. So I just wanted to talk about that story in connection to some of these things, because it can get really confusing when we go, well, why? How does this happen? And this is one of the mechanisms. Now, of course, other ways that we can end up with what we might consider mental illness, psychiatric disorders could be other forms of trauma. So what I just said was sort of this misattunement, this lack of secure attachment. I remember this client did not grow up in physical violence, sexual violence. It was what we might call these little T's. And I hate that term, little traumas, because what we've seen, it is actually sometimes trickier to work with the little T's because they're hidden. They're not really there. And someone like this client of mine, they will just think this is how life is. And some people never get that exposure to what a good family system might look like. And then that throws confusion into the situation, because then we're like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to react and act when I try to express and it falls on, as we might say, deaf ears? Okay, so I'm getting a bit too much light in here. There we go. Okay, I'm going to take a little water and I'll get back into what I want to speak about. Someone's asking where the PubMed reference is. I just posted this on Instagram, and what I'll do, let's see if I can find it really quickly. Taylor et al. And Shore. There it is. Oh. We'll find it. We'll find it. Essentially, it's what I just said. When there is early adversity, trauma, disorganized attachment, no secure attachment, misattunement, it throws our system into this tailspin of fight, flight, freeze, not feeling like we belong, not feeling like our needs are met because they're not. This creates dysregulation of the nervous system. It's really as simple as that. Okay. The other thing I want to do, this is in relationship to smart body, smart mind. So again, I want to talk a little bit about how SBSM, and I'll talk about this when I get into the questions, relates to mental illness, psychiatric disorders. Before I do that, I want to read one of the FAQs from our site, just to do my due diligence, because this will help some, and I'll be honest, it might confuse some of my students. So this is on our FAQ page. It's the 15th question on the Smart Body, Smart Mind website. And the question reads, can SBSM help with mental illness? Now, of course, we have to say this program is not intended to treat or cure any disease or illness, including any diagnosed mental illness. That said, anyone can benefit from increased nervous system regulation. This is true. A person needs to be well enough and organized enough in their thinking to watch and absorb the education and do the practices. So just as an aside, again, SBSM is education, theory, and what we call neurosensory exercises, which are the practical practices of the work to gain more nervous system regulation, grow capacity. We then write, so someone presenting with a very extreme symptom like paranoid schizophrenia, for example, will not be able to benefit from this program, whereas someone struggling with a condition like OCD, anxiety, or depression most likely will. As long as one is well enough and they can show up, put in the time, and comprehend what is happening, they will likely benefit. Now, what I'm going to add to this, because I've been doing this work in this program for many times, this will be our 16th live session. Some of our students have entered into SBSM with really severe psychiatric diagnoses. Many are on medications. And when they see this, they get a little offended, I'll be really honest, because they're like, but Irene, I had this extreme disorder and I was able to do your program, and I have had a lot of help and a lot of healing. So I also want to share that because each person is individual. Each person knows their limits, knows their boundaries, knows their support system, knows what they have access to. So I'm not going to say to someone, because you have this, you can't do this. You have to be the judge. You have to tune into your own system. You need to consult with your other healthcare providers, your support systems, and make the decision for yourself. And the reason I say that is because one of the hallmarks of us growing up in a toxic environment where we're not attuned to, where there isn't unconditional care, is we stop thinking for ourselves. We don't realize that we have the ability to make choice and free will decisions for ourselves. Now, of course, when we're stuck in a spiral of these fight, flight, freeze mechanisms and then collapse and shut down, I will admit our ability to be clear in our thinking and really know what our gut felt sense is, it's a little muddy. It's a little gray. It's not as black and white. But if you're here, if you're able to listen and read the chat and comprehend even 10% of what I'm saying, then in my opinion, you have enough resolve, enough wherewithal, enough interest in your healing and in your capacity to do this work. So I just wanted to read that because it's there and it can sometimes throw people off, especially our students. And we have had some who have said, I was not in a good place mentally in my psyche, and this was the only thing that helped. I'm actually going to read something that we caught from a YouTube, I think it was a YouTube comment. And I don't know who the name is, not important, but someone just said, I'm in awe and gratitude of your drive and direction. Thank you. I referred to myself as the self-help queen, trying everything until at age 69, I found you. What luck? I don't think it's luck. Your program got me out of my head for the first time ever! Exclamation mark. I now know I'm now somewhere I've never been, and it's wonderful. Thank you. So she said, I think it was a she, this program got me out of my head for the first time, and I'm now somewhere I've never been. So that connects to this whole idea of psyche, mind, mental health. When we have been in an environment that is toxic, abusive, but also these misattunements and lack of care and connection, because of our higher brain, we will try to understand. We will try to figure out, why am I not being listened to? Why is nobody coming to my rescue? Why am I having to suppress all this stuff? This doesn't make sense. The classic situation of parents getting divorced, which of course happens a lot and often for good reason, even if the child knows and has been told, this isn't your fault, this isn't your fault, this is mommy and daddy, that child will continually think something is wrong with them. Something is wrong with them. They will try to analyze it. One could say this is the start of overthinking, trying to solve a question that just can't be solved because they're too little. And then it creates worry. And then it creates this, what we would call anxiety, which is essentially fight, flight within the system. The other thing that's often common, I'll speak to social anxiety. Does anybody have that? Anybody familiar with that? This is something that my husband, Seth, who I often do these talks with, and he's a colleague of mine, and he also teaches in SBSM. He had horrific social anxiety when I met him, and as well as complex PTSD and chronic illness and addiction and everything that I'm talking about this week. And that's due to growing up in a violent household with his father and an emotionally abusive household with his mother. So he got the worst of both worlds in terms of toxic stress and abuse. And so what a child does to figure that out when they know they can't run away and they know they can't fight back is they will monitor the situation. They will try to figure out what's going on. How do I have to be today? Oh, I heard the keys drop in on the coffee table. Today, it's a little harder. Dad slammed the door a little faster, a little swifter. He didn't say hi to me and my siblings. He went straight to the fridge and grabbed a beer or whatever. Nothing wrong with beer, but just what I'm saying. Like, that was his default. When a kid picks up on that stuff, they will change themselves. They're not going to be that kid going, Daddy, 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 look what I did at school today. They are going to shut down. And so what starts to occur in these individuals is they become hypersensitive and aware to their surroundings, which is a superpower in some ways. But what it does is it exhausts the system. A person can't just be in a room and be themselves. And there's a great story that Seth tells where we were at one of our first social engagements when we got together. This was like 14 years ago. And I was having something happening at our house, and people were coming in. After about the sixth person that came in, he disappeared. I'm like, where did Seth go? And he couldn't handle it. He could not handle having to change himself. Okay, that person is this. I got to be this person, like this. Okay, this person, I need to be this funny person. This person, I need to be the serious person. And basically his system went into shutdown and he had to flee. So he fled and was like, I got to get out of here. This is not a way to live, and that can drive us a little crazy in the head. Okay. Yeah, someone just said that was me as a child. So I wanted to talk a little bit about social anxiety. I'm going to read one thing. I read this on Wednesday, but it's worth repeating. And then I'll get into the questions. When we think about healing our body, we need to think about it from a bottom-up approach, meaning working with the body, and then that impacts what we would call the brain and the mind. In Smart Body, Smart Mind, we are not working directly with the limbic system, the amygdala, the thought patterns. We're not working with that. We're working with the physiology. And about 4 years ago, we did a study, an actual study at a university, at a neuroscience lab. We took our Smart Body, Smart Mind members. We started with 80. At the end, we had 40, which is still pretty good for a first-time study. They went through the curriculum, and the findings were most prominent and positive around mental health outcomes. So I'm going to read this. I'm just going to read the findings. I'm not going to read the thesis as to why this researcher was researching this with us. What I will say, the researcher was interested in interoception and finding ways to work with interoception and improve interoception in the human subject. Our program does that. So our hypothesis was we're going to find improvements when we put people through Smart Body, Smart Mind, because they're learning how to be in their bodies, how to work with their bodies, get educated about their bodies. And so this is what we found. The study revealed several significant findings. First, it was found that, as anticipated, the program did result in several increases in participants' somatic, that's body, and interoceptive awareness relative to baseline. So just a quick one. Interoception means our ability to perceive our internal environment. If we were brought up in a house where it was terrifying, violent, or misattuned, what do we start to do? We cut off from our body. We only live in our head because this is too confusing and scary. So this is how we start to dissociate from the body, and we go all mental. We're all in our head. Specifically, they reported greater trust and safety in their body, as well as less worrying about their bodily experiences, indicating a different relationship to one's body following the program. Compared to baseline, participants also showed greater self-compassion. Greater self-compassion. One of the things we know when folks struggle with mental health disorders is they beat themselves up, not physically, literally, but they're constantly hating on themselves. You're so stupid. You're such an idiot. Why would you do that kind of thing? These are words that are usually spoken to us from our caregivers, our providers, our teachers, and then we internalize it, and then we latch onto it, and it's just this script. We would call them interjects in the psychology word that just keep beating us down, and we want to get out of that. So again, greater self-compassion, as well as a trend towards improvements in relationship functioning. This is huge. Again, if our relational situation growing up was horrific, why the heck are we going to get into a happy relationship? We will either get into a toxic relationship or we will have no relationship at all, because that is too scary. Participants also self-reported improvements in specific aspects of cognitive function, which is amazing. All of cognitive function, including their ability to focus and regulate their attention. This connects with attention deficit disorder. Avoid distraction and be better organized, although these findings were based on self-report, because most participants performed well on cognitive testing at baseline. So what that means, people going into this study already had some pretty good brain power. They can cognitively think and organize, but there was this little bit of an improvement in that ability to focus. People who had mental health challenges, so listen up, people who had mental health challenges reported doing slightly better in terms of being less distractible and less over-identified with their problems. What that last piece means is we're no longer focusing on how terrible everything is in our bodies, how terrible our past was, how terrible my situation is. This is all survival stress thinking. It doesn't help us heal our physiology. We need to get out of that in order to heal our system. I'm also going to add, this is in regards to the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. So everybody did their ACE score within this study. And it says those with higher ACEs, what that basically means is we had more childhood adversities than others, seem to benefit more from the program than those without, including a greater reduction in perceived stress, overall physical symptom severity, and reduction in trauma-related functional impairments, as well as a trend towards higher resiliency. I'm super proud of this because what it has showed is what we're doing here is not just anecdotal, it is actual evidence-based. We've put it through the test of scientific rigor. Of course, we need more power. We need to do this over and over again with people. But we have seen with our students, with our participants in SBSM, we just get these sorts of stories over and over and over again. All right, I'm going to get into questions. And as I do that, I will no doubt offer more education and more theory. Okay, let's move these over here. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. So I've already sort of answered this, but the first question up here is, can a schizophrenia patient without hallucinations do this work? So I really already covered this. You've got to go into your own system, tune into what your system wants. If you have a healthcare provider that you're working with, talk to them. We're more than happy to, this data that we just said, it hasn't reached peer-reviewed material yet. But I do have an article on my post about on my blog, I should say, about empirical evidence. And we have the formal press release that this research lab put out. We could share that with you. We can put it in the chat and in the show more section when we process this video. So, you know, you got to feel into it yourself. There will be some people who have mild physical symptoms, and they go into this work and they find that they can't be motivated enough to do it. And often, unfortunately, in our day and age, it takes us to be pretty sick to get serious about taking care of our health. So one of the things I said in that those few paragraphs around this study with SBSM is those with higher ACE scores improved more. And one could say that's because they were starting with less capacity. The thing that I think we forget is even when we don't have severe dysregulation, the typical human in the West is still only living at half mass because of cultural conditioning, just all the things that we've been subjected to. We don't even realize, I mean, we don't have any clue how much potential we have as humans. So I wanted to just put that out there. Okay. This is a bit more housekeeping, but my team were like, people keep asking this, so I'm going to answer it. Someone has asked, we're getting a lot of, or one of my team said, we're getting a lot of people asking about time zones. And if they're not in my Pacific time, how do they do the course? Everything is on our program site, recorded, replay, transcripts, audio. So the core curriculum is pre-recorded audio lessons that we've been using for years and years. They're tried and tested. It's the same stuff that the people in the study did. So that is all pre-recorded, no need for time zone. The training calls that I teach, and I co-teach sometimes with not co-teach, my husband Seth will do some of them. He also does the curated Q&A calls. That is all live, but it is also all recorded. So if you can't make it live, that is okay. We have people across all time zones, the 2 hemispheres of Earth. Some people are just sleeping all the time when we're doing our lives, and that's okay. Most people don't attend live, and of course, if you can, that's nice, but it's not necessary. Okay. So this is a longer question, and that's okay. So I'm going to read it through. Can you please help explain what is happening? Just a sec. What is happening here and how SBSM can help me? So I've been diagnosed with social phobia. So I just sort of talked about that with social anxiety. I didn't use the term phobia, but it's within the same camp, and complex PTSD. So I also mentioned that when I was talking about my husband who had social anxiety, phobias, and complex PTSD. I'm 39 years old. I've experienced systemic peer abuse from age 12 to 17 involving enormous levels of mass shaming and gaslighting. So, as this person says, lots of stored survival stress in my throat and face. Yes, right? When we have any kind of abuse that involves shaming and gaslighting, and we can't fight back, and we can't get out, and we have to show up every day, let's say it's school, that will throw us into PTSD, complex PTSD. PTSD is not just for those who have survived war and natural disasters. It happens in home life, even when there isn't massive violence. And it also happens at school, even when there isn't massive physical violence. The shame, this toxic shame and gaslighting, it does it. There's also intense fear, physical pain. Maintaining eye contact is difficult. Again, this connects with what I talked about yesterday in my chronic illness talk, so be sure to watch that. Weak voice, I struggle to do the VOO. I talked about this yesterday, actually. I get out of breath in conversation. Makes sense. Like right now, I'm talking a lot. My breath doesn't go out because I have capacity in my viscera and in my lungs to keep refilling oxygen, even though I'm moving and in this a bit more sympathetic state, talking, thinking, looking at all these things. So what this person is really showcasing here is a very, very, very small capacity in their system. And this is okay. This is what we work with. I struggle to resource it all around other people, and I almost never feel safe face to face. Again, this makes sense. If your traumas occurred at the hands of people, then yeah, why would you want to be around people? It makes complete sense. What I will say is we are meant to be with people. That is how our circuitry works. And when I talked about the polyvagal theory yesterday, the key portion of the vagus nerve that governs the face, the ear, the throat, and downregulates the heart, it's called the ventral vagus of the vagus nerve. We need that to be online to feel at ease and calm with people. It helps bring us down. But of course, if the history with people is people aren't safe, then we're not going to be able to tap into that ventral vagal portion of our parasympathetic nervous system. So what I'm doing here, everyone, it's a long history, but I want to add in the theory as I go along so we don't lose anything. I also have flashes of extreme dread and inability to think or speak clearly around others. Again, makes sense. If we were shamed and gaslit by, I'm going to assume peers, age 12 to 17, yeah, I would wake up with butterflies in my stomach and never want to go out either, right? Because it's like you're going into battle and you know you're going to be attacked and abused. So that is going to create massive fear. I muddle my words and I forget my train of thought. Again, when we are living in this survival stress chaos, our brain can't think clearly. This is why I said in this read-up of the study, people were more able to have clearer thinking and more fine-tuned attention. I rehearse interactions because of this. Yes, so this is another way in which we flip into mental disorders, is we're constantly talking to ourselves. Okay, how am I going to say this? What am I going to say? Okay, I'm going to say it this way. No, I can't say it that way. And we exhaust ourselves with energy used up that isn't necessary. Facial muscles twitch and hurt to keep eyes open. Makes sense. Again, I want to commend this person because they're here and they're writing and they're interested in their healing. When we've had this level of traumatic stress, typically our system goes into collapse and shutdown. I talked about sleep disorders yesterday, but also cataplexy and narcolepsy. These are indications of the system wanting to collapse. So when we're fighting to keep our eyes and attention, it's like something's trying to push the door and we're trying to push it back. I often feel frozen. Yes, people's faces look strange, alien-like, and feel extremely frightening. CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, doesn't help as symptoms are so automatic and I'm desperate to get better. Of course, CBT doesn't work because that is typically dealing with the cognition. And I just want to again commend you, desperate to get better. Awesome. Sometimes desperation is the best catalyst to get us going forward. Everything that you just wrote here makes complete sense. And this is exactly what we work with in Smart Body, Smart Mind. The reason why CBT doesn't work is it's top down. This is a physiological situation you are in. Your system was under intense threat. And we would also call this in the somatic experiencing world, inescapable attack. Even if you weren't being violently hit, you are being hit with words and shame, toxic shame, and you can't escape. So very intense overview of symptoms and situation. The struggling to VU, again, capacity. This connects with the breath. When we have constriction in the body and everything is constricted and in fear, think deer in the headlights or animal that's collapsed and can't get their bark out. They're not hungry. My sense is I'm going to make maybe an assumption that there's also a lack of appetite, or maybe the opposite, too much of an appetite. We're in a lethargy. We're not in a good spark of life force energy. And I can say confidently, your story I've heard before in different situations, different kinds of abusive relationships, and people do get better. And it requires time and titration and foundation building. Okay, next question. Why do I have so many intrusive thoughts in the morning? When I wake up in the morning, it seems I'm continuously thinking, even in sleep. So again, this comes back to sort of what I've been saying a little bit, which is when we can't make sense of what's happening in our physiology, or we have past traumas that are too difficult for us to comprehend and digest and integrate and work with piecemeal in what we would call titrated drops, it's like we're loading the system with just too much information and we're trying to make sense of what's going on. One of the common things, and I've experienced this in the past, especially when I've been in more stressful times in my life, and I know I've got something really difficult to do, is there'll be this kind of dread. And the dread is such that I'm trying to figure out mentally how to work with it. Less now that my regulation is on board, but I was that kid who couldn't stand school. I was the kid that was always in the nurse's office with a tummy ache because I didn't do well. I couldn't do math. I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't attention deficit. It was just survival stress from my birth trauma that I am now figuring out. So why you have them, I can't answer that, but it will connect to something that is stored in the system, and this inability to be in the body, connect with the environment, be with the sensations that might be in your body. So again, if we don't even know that this body exists, now, and I know it exists because you can feel it and touch it, but if we're not masters at the nuance, again, I'm going to use that word interoception, it's like we're trying to cram everything in this system up into the head, and it's just too much. And then in terms of even when we're sleeping, again, when we go into sleep state, this is kind of, one of my old teachers said, that's where we do the washing up, the laundry of the day. But if we have a whole lifetime of stresses and traumas that have never been processed at the somatic level and they're stuck in us, the dreams can be not only constant thinking, they can be riddled with worry, anxiety, threat, violence, nightmares, these sorts of things. Okay, next question. I'm going to try to decipher this question. So when someone said, when the numbness state of functional freeze is constant for years, what keeps in place externally and internally, and what would work? So I'm not exactly sure what this means, but I'll talk about functional freeze as a general whole. So functional freeze is something that I lived with for a long time, up until just probably 5 or 6 years ago. Even though I was still able to do this work, and functional means you can think, you can do your life, you can make money, you can have relationships, you can have a good time. Very, very, very able-bodied. However, it's being driven because we're not wanting to feel the stored survival stress inside. And so when that's occurring, we can actually still be pretty able in our bodies. I was very athletic, all these things, I traveled, but there were portions of myself that were just not quite there, dissociated a little bit, but not in thinking, just sort of like this grayness to certain areas of the body, this lack of flow, this lack of nuance, emotional nuance. I didn't really understand what anger was until I was in my somatic experiencing training. I knew what sadness was. I could cry, all these things. So everybody's going to be a bit different in how they present in functional freeze. But what will occur, from what we've seen, and this again connects with the ACE study, is this functional freeze is one of the trickier ones to work with, because a person will appear just okay, they're fine. But then slowly over the decades of their life, there'll be just these health problems that crop up, these things that are mysterious that can't be figured out, relational troubles, getting into accidents. This is what occurred to me. I was constantly getting into accidents until I started this work. So I hope that answers that question to a certain degree. Okay. So someone says, yesterday you said you need to be in a safe environment to heal. I live in a mouldy home and can't afford to move right now. Can SBSM still help me, or should I hold off on doing SBSM until I move? That's a tough one for me to answer. I'm just being honest, because that type of threat in the system, in the home life, is definitely not good for us. So if I were to say, if the money that you spend in SBSM could go towards you finding another home or an apartment, I would say do that first. But I also know that that requires a lot more than SBSM's tuition, which is $2,000 US. So you're going to have to kind of listen to your gut with this one. I can say that when you become more regulated and have more capacity, you will do things in your life that will help your body heal and your detox pathways will get better. But I also know when there is a toxin like mold in the environment, it's going to be causing this constant threat to the system. So this is where, making sure that windows are always open, it's dry, you have dry heat going through your home, making sure you're eating foods that are really healthy and clean, using various detox situations and practices to get the system healthy. But then I'll also say that as you become healthier and more regulated, the system will also again, I'm just speculating here, it might not handle the mold well. I have been in moldy homes. I was in the first moldy home that I've ever been in a couple of years ago. I didn't know what mold was. And there's no doubt I was in those situations, but my system was so functionally frozen that I didn't know. Just like I had no trouble with fragrances and scents in my 20s and 30s. And now I can't even stand the smell of most soaps, right? And so this isn't a hypersensitivity. It's just when you get out of these functional freeze patterns and you're in regulation, you're like the animals in the wild. You don't want to touch any poisons or toxins. So I wish I could answer this more directly. I'm just being really honest, and you're just going to have to feel into what is right for you in this moment. And then I also would say, if you can't go into SBSM and it makes sense to take that money and move, then do the free resources, do our drop-in classes. So someone said, I wonder if Robert Scaer, so in the quote that I mentioned, was talking about neurotic conditions, not psychotic conditions. It was psychiatric disorders. So he was talking about some research. And I know from working with just listening and learning from Peter and my other mentors and folks who have written books like Bessel van der Kolk, they are pretty much, they have said, and I can't find the exact quote because you hear these things all over the place, that pretty much every diagnostic psychiatric disorder in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Psychiatric Illness, is connected to early trauma, misattunement, dysregulation. Yes, toxins, vitamin deficiencies, all these things might play a role. And we've even realized recently, thinking, that we thought neurotransmitters were the reason for certain forms of mental illness, and we're seeing not the case so much. Those get impacted, but what is causing those neurotransmitters to go off the charts? Typically, there's something going on at that core regulation level. Okay. Hormones. So perimenopause and intrusive thoughts. Why now? That's a great question. Well, as someone who's technically almost, some say I'm in that zone right now. I'm 49 this year. So, I get it. And what I also will say, this comes back to an example I often use. So in my healing trauma video series, I haven't mentioned this in a while, the first video, these are old videos. Irene was a lot younger in them. But the first video, I talk about two scenarios. One is an analogy. It's called my swimming pool and beach ball analogy. It essentially describes building capacity, why we want to build capacity, and why we want to take toxic stressors out of our system. There's also an analogy in that video where I talk about two different types of folk. And so this is going to make sense in a second. And this will also be important for anyone here who, that you had that car accident and then you were just not mentally stable afterwards, or you had that life event that was so stressful and you haven't been able to sleep since then, or your gut's gone off. So again, this goes back to what occurred to us when we were young. Typically, when we are little and we're not getting proper connection, attunement, safety, attachment, good co-regulation with a fairly regulated caregiver, provider, parent, we will not build up robust, strong, resilient regulation of our autonomic nervous system. Specifically, portions of our vagus nerve that go to the face and the heart. This is called the ventral aspect of the vagus nerve. This needs to be built up when we're young. This nerve gets myelinated as we have connection, and that's what allows us to have a real window of tolerance. So this is a key word, a real window of tolerance. It allows us to have a stressor come at us. We feel a little activated. We feel a little out of place. Not feeling very good. But then we come back down to real baseline. This happens in people, worked with them many, where they will think they're fine. They have this tiny little car accident, or they have this little tiny life event, and then the next day they're bedridden. They have chronic pain. They have intrusive thoughts. They go to the doctor. Sorry, guys, I think there's a mosquito biting me. They go to the doctor and they're like, oh, well, yeah, we'll put you on some meds to get rid of these thoughts. Oh, maybe it's hormones. You're in the perimenopausal years. This is just normal, right? All these things. Now, what I think happens, not in everyone, but in many women who have these intrusive thoughts and everything just goes haywire when the hormones start to change, is the baseline capacity and regulation actually never was there in the first place. And so they've been holding on and coasting and being pretty good with their health. They've been eating well, they've been exercising, and then they're like, what the heck is going on? I take care of myself so well. Why am I having these things? My suspicion, and this is just my hypothesis, is these excessive symptoms of perimenopause are because of the dysregulation and the lack of real window of tolerance, which was always the case. So I've seen two sides. I've seen folks who work on their nervous system, they work on healing, and their menstrual cycles change, these perimenopausal cycles change, the symptoms change, I should say, and it's like a godsend. Others, not so much. They work on this stuff and, oh, there really is something off hormonally. And then they do the blood work, they do the urine work, they figure out like, yeah, there's definitely not enough testosterone, or there's too much estrogen, and we need to shift things. So I think this is very individual. I know it's very individual. My hunch is a lot of this is as a result of the dysregulation that was always there, and they didn't understand that it was there because they had a pretty healthy life and they didn't have a lot of big life events that shocked their system. But then they go into this shift, and there is a shift in the hormonal structure as we no longer can bear children, and it's like being rocked like a car accident. I hope that helps. The other thing that's very important with our hormones, this isn't just for women, this is for men, FYI. I've talked about the importance of circadian health and quantum health. I know there was a question around mitochondrial health and energy metabolism. I won't get into that today. I don't want to go into that scope, but check out the interviews I've done on my YouTube channel here. There's 5 interviews on the importance of sunlight, the importance of grounding, like earth, like getting your feet onto the ground. It's not hippie stuff. It's real important stuff. Not having blue light in our faces at night or first thing in the morning. And then also food things that we don't really think of, but seed oils are horrific for our body and our hormones and our metabolism, as one example, and minerals. Many of us are mineral deficient. So that's what I want to say about that. Okay. Let me just have some water, everyone. Okay. This is from email and also live on the call. So, is it possible to resist against going into social engagement and rest digest mode if we have severe social anxiety and antisocial behavior? So the answer is yes. Is it possible to resist? I'm going to frame this differently, and I hope I get it right. So what I think you're saying is it possible to not go into rest digest mode and social engagement if we have severe social anxiety? 100%. So this comes back to what I talked about yesterday with the polyvagal theory. So quickly, the way in which the autonomic nervous system works It isn't just one or the other. It's very hierarchical, and it shifts kind of back and forth. It's not this one and then the other. It shifts. And so if we are living with, in this case, social anxiety, antisocial behavior, this is a sign of dysregulation of the nervous system. We need to be around people. It is how we were built as humans. We need that connection, because if we didn't have that connection when we were young, we would die. Even not the best connection is good enough to keep a human alive, which is mind-blowing if you really think about it, right? There's a lot of us here that had horrific connection when we were young, and yet we're still here. We've learned how to write and read and build businesses and have families and take care of ourselves to a certain degree. But when we have, even if it's this functional freeze that I just talked about, but also this social anxiety, that keeps us trapped in this fight, flight, and we might say this freeze, shutdown mode of the parasympathetic nervous system, the dorsal branches of the parasympathetic nervous system, and the fight, flight branches of the sympathetic nervous system. Which means when the focus is always there, when the system is in this survival mode, it doesn't allow the rest, digest, and the social engagement mode, which are both parasympathetic of dorsal, I'm getting a little more into the theory here, and parasympathetic of ventral. So it's like when one is happening, you can't have the other at 100%. This is why when we have lots of survival stress, people's gut will go off, their immune system will be poor, their sleep will be poor. So I hope that makes sense. You also say I have a lot of relational trauma, emotional neglect, chronic invalidation, and lately I find that I want nothing to do with people. So here's the other thing. Yes, 100%. The other thing to remember, we're living in a situation right now, and I hope this isn't too depressing, but it's just the reality. There's a lot of people out there who are living in strong survival patterns, high levels of anxiety, high levels of shutdown, not good in their physiology. The energetic that they put off is not fun to be around. So there's some truth in us being very picky about who we connect with. I was just on a podcast a month or so ago, and it just released 2 days ago. And there was a story that the interviewer was saying when she had she still has 2 little kids. One is quite little, and they had a caretaker, kind of like a nanny helper in the house. And she really liked this nanny caretaker, but this caretaker had so much anxiety, and it was and they didn't realize how badly it was impacting the family structure, even though this nanny was doing so many good things, probably cooking and cleaning and helping and doing errands and being with the kids. But the children were being impacted deeply by this caring human that had all this underlying survival stress. They finally, let this person go. And even though they had less help, everything just shifted in the family system, and everybody was a lot happier. So I'm just saying that because sometimes we beat ourselves up for not wanting to be around people, but it also can be because a lot of the people around us or maybe old friends, old relationships, our family, it's just hard to be around them because we sense their dysregulation. And if we're wanting to heal our own dysregulation, we need to be very picky about who we connect with and or be very boundaried with it. I'm not saying disconnect from every single person in our lives, because that can be really isolating, but titrate, right? Titrate. Okay. So next question. I'm exhausted after 5 low back surgeries. Ouch, that's a lot, with 3 screws. So there's metal in your system. I understand that. The neurosurgeon from Uruguay okay. So you had screws. It looks like some of them came out. I'm in huge pain 24/7. Can SBSM help? I will say yes. I'm not going to say that it's going to be a miracle cure. As someone who has had more than 7 surgeries on her knees and has had metal and hardware in my bones and has had stuff taken out. I just had a staple taken out of my tibia last summer. It's taken about a year for that to heal. And I do a lot of stuff. And the reason I share that is we think even when metal comes out, everything will just be fine. But the bone, the fascia has grown around that. And so when we take it out, we have to reestablish the functionality of that entire system. So SBSM can help. And the reason why is because if there is still, and I'm going to make a guess that there is, shock in the system from the injuries that maybe led to the back surgery, the surgeries itself can hold a lot of survival stress in our system because of the anesthesia, the amount of movement that occurs in our body when we're unconscious. Just that alone will be aided by going through Smart Body, Smart Mind and going into the neurosensory exercises and really learning how to slow things down and work with the viscera, the diaphragms, the joints, but also the movement. So I haven't talked about the Feldenkrais method very much in my talks this week, but one of the things I'm trained in is something called the Feldenkrais method. And this teaches us how to move again in very gentle, subtle ways. It goes back to baby development and learning how to connect our pelvis and our ribs and our head and our legs. And when we've had a spinal surgery, all the focus is on the spine and all the focus is on the inflammation and trying to mitigate the inflammation and get flow back to that area. But what we often forget, and when I used to work hands-on, if someone had back pain, I would often work with their shoulders and their ribs or their sternum or their head or their feet. Because if you're walking around and if your feet are rigid and don't have flow, then the force can't go through them and then it gets stuck in joints of the body. So I'm actually really excited if you can go into SBSM for you to not only mitigate and have the survival stress come out of your system through the titrated capacity building practices, but also getting into these gentle movements that I feel will no doubt offer you relief and a bit more flow and functionality. I will also say that if you have the capacity, resources to get body work done, gentle body work, but also work that works at the fascia level. I know it's very hard to find a really good osteopath, but there's some of the better ones out there to work with these sorts of surgical interventions. And then I'll also say working with the scar around your spine, because no doubt there's going to be some scars there. The scars can create a lot of pain because the fascia will stick to them and that will create tension patterns that kind of are a bit wonky. So working with the scar, getting fascial work around the scar, very, very important. And then hydrotherapy is another great one. Doing baths of warm contrasted with cold can help flush the system and get movement and circulation going. Those are just some things, but good luck with your recovery. Okay, I just sort of answered this one. So why was I seemingly fine, if not thriving, until I hit adulthood? All of a sudden, tons of issues, including a chronic disorder, a reproductive disorder, went from capacity, capable to barely functioning. I just answered that with the question around perimenopause. That's the answer right there. I won't repeat myself other than to say, watch the healing trauma video #1, where I talk about these 2 different types of people, person A and person B. We don't realize, and here's the truth, I did not have any idea how much early and utero trauma I had up until just recently. By just recently, I mean like 7 or so years ago, and really more so in the last 5 years. And we just don't realize as humans currently on planet Earth how much our birth process, our school process, educational process, culture, society, religion, dogma, how much that really hinders our capacity to be truly human and healthy and functioning. I think it's starting to get a little bit more out there, but the level of functional freeze that most of us have lived in is truly a lot. And it's very important to just kind of go, oh, wow, and not be overwhelmed by it, but go, wow, we really are a robust species to still be here with all of this trauma and stress and functional freeze. And I think what's happening right now in our world area, the stage, is we can't handle this anymore. We're seeing this in the chronic disease in children. We're seeing this in the mental disease and all sorts of populations, people getting sick a lot earlier, learning disabilities, all these things. And of course, the food supply, toxins, pharmaceuticals all play a part. And when we have regulation on board, we just know how to live better and make better choices. Sounds a little cliche, but it is true. I wanted to ask if you could comment on the relationship between nervous system dysregulation, functional freeze, and eye floaters and tunnel vision or blurry vision. There's not a lot I will say other than eye floaters. I'm not an expert in. I do have some in one eye. And even with all the health practices I do at this point, I haven't been able to get rid of them. So that's one personal story. Blurry vision and tunnel vision, however, that can be related to, of course, how our nerves are processing the tension in our head and eyes. We forget that our eyes have, I believe, I haven't reviewed anatomy in a while, but 8 muscles that surround them. And our eyes are essentially an extension of our brain, and they're massive sensory organs. I do remember when I was starting to get into this work, my vision, even though I have poor vision and I wear lenses, it got crisper and more focused as the tension in my spinal column and cord shifted. So our eyes, again, sensory organs, very important. And there's also a lot going on in the eye. I'm not an expert in eye health. I will say that it's very important for us to not be stuck to our screens all the time. We need to look far and out into the horizon, into the world around us. That softens the muscles of the eyes. And also sun, it's so important. And I don't mean direct looking at the sun, but we need natural light in our eyes. And so many of us wear lenses and glasses and sunglasses. And when we don't get healthy sunlight into our eyes, that also harms them. So we need to be outside more. Okay, next question. So it's not helpful to do any CBT or similar type of therapy while trying to do SBSM? Not necessarily. So I want to be very clear. There's nothing wrong with having a therapist, going to therapy, group therapy, some form of social work. The key is that you're complementing it with the body work, say, for example, in SBSM. So it also comes down to the therapist's ability to help you and acknowledge your body. So some therapists will be great with that. They'll be excited that you're trying something new and they want to learn about what you're learning. And then I've heard stories where other therapists will knock and discredit the work that we do because it's not evidence-based, for example. So I think you really need to do what works for you. I would say many of our students even have coaches to help them stay motivated and break through resistance around doing the work. So no, there's nothing wrong with doing therapy alongside. It's just knowing that you need to have someone who will honor what's going on in your body. And what often happens is a person will be doing, say, the somatic work with us. They'll go to a therapist, and then the therapist, they don't match up with what the person is learning. And then they go into a piece of work, and the person isn't honoring their need to go slower or to take more time, or to say, that's enough for today. I know we're not at our hour, but I kind of feel like my system is cooked. If that therapist can't be okay with that, then that's not a good therapist. So just be really cautious about that. Someone asks, I've heard trauma and PTSD referred to as an injury versus a mental illness. What are your thoughts on that? 100%. Yeah. I mean, post-traumatic stress disorder, complex PTSD, stored traumatic stress, it is in the body, right? There's a reason why Bessel van der Kolk's book is called The Body Keeps the Score, even though his training and everything is in psychiatry, right? 100%. And this is really the crux of where we're at right now, I think, in working with mental disorder, mental illness. I haven't mentioned addiction yet. Addiction, I've done interviews with 2 of my students. I really recommend them. They are long, but they're great conversations. One with Rachel Martin and one with Selden Belouni. I've actually done 2 interviews with both of those ladies. It's worth watching both beginning and end, so their first interview and their second, because you see the difference in their regulation and how they show up. And one of them, Rachel, she's one of my senior students. She works at a drug and rehab facility in Mexico, and she's just doing great work because she's working with the body. She's working with this, as you would say here, this injured area of the system due to chronic stress, as opposed to treating it like a mental illness, right? The common thing that one of my teachers, Kathy Kane, would say, and this is taken from one of her mentors, Tony Richardson, they would say that the brain is an end organ. The brain is an end organ. In other words, the brain and our thought process is impacted by the physiology. So sure, I could definitely say, yep, this stuff is an injury. And then, of course, how do we treat an injury? We have to treat an injury holistically. We can't just treat just the injured area. We have to look at the whole system. Can you speak to easing ourselves into this? I've dabbled in the 21-day and SBSM, but at times I feel like I need to cocoon due to anxiety. Is that me getting better, or am I making things worse? So there's nothing wrong with sort of cocooning, as you say, or going slower. It comes back down to, what are you noticing in your body when you do cocoon and you do slow down? Is it a part of your system that needed to go slower when you were young? Were you pushed and pushed to never have any time to rest or to feel or to just be with yourself, right? So many of us in this current world were brought up always going, always in an activity, always being trucked to another place, in another space, in another event, in another sporting event, another school. And then there's summer camp, and then there's dinner at grandma's, and all these bloody birthdays that we have to go to. And a kid who needs time will override their feelings. And then what can happen is, when we start to work with ourselves and we start to follow our impulse, our biological impulse, we might think, oh my goodness, I don't want to do anything at all. I don't want to do anything. And sometimes there can be this fear that if I actually let this happen, I am never going to get out of bed. And we have to realize this could be the system expressing a need to really slow down as a result of a lifetime that never allowed any moments of pause, of breath, of breathing, of just being still. The key is monitoring yourself and making sure that that doesn't become the norm for like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And then, of course, since you are a member, please ask questions. Use the resources within our courses. Ask our moderators how to work with this when you tune into it. Next question. I had a sexual addiction for decades. Do you think that a sexual addiction indicates sexual issues in childhood, Or might it just as well be a coincidence and a coping strategy that just worked for me? Definitely does not have to do with sexual abuse or sexual issues in childhood. Again, our sexuality is part of our physiology. It offers us pleasure. It offers us release. It is a way to calm ourselves and feel soothing and some form of also euphoria and energy. So I'm just going to speak generally, if we live more in a state of shutdown and functional freeze, sexual activity will give us that adrenaline. This is what we see in folks who are, say, addicted to shopping, addicted to adrenaline, addicted to work, addicted to sex. In this case, it pushes us out of our functional freeze and what we might call our shutdown collapse state. And so it doesn't have to do with sexual abuse or issues in childhood. From my experience, less about that and more about how we've been trapped in a state of, again, fight, flight, freeze, but then that maybe collapse, shut down with that umbrella of functional freeze on top of it. So when it comes to any addiction, and I've talked about this, Seth and I did some talks about this around his addictions to various things, substances, porn is another one he spoke about in one of his articles. We could find that and link that here. It comes back down to the relationship that you're having with that behavior and starting to really unpack and titrate the sensations in the body, also the thoughts, but also the emotions and the history of that need to soothe ourselves or to bring ourselves up, right? And we kind of ping pong, depending on our history, will either be that person who needs more soothing because we have a bit more what we would call anxiety in our system, a bit more hypervigilance, or we're so lethargic we need a pick-me-up every day, right? We need to jump off of a mountain. That's what I used to do. We need to drive cars really fast. We need to take that hit of cocaine. We need to have that drink to calm ourselves down, that smoke to calm ourselves down. And so this is how we connect to these behaviors and substances and actions as a way to find self-regulation. The interesting thing is that when you start to regulate your system, people will go to their behavior, their addiction out of default. But if you can stop long enough and actually ask yourself the question, do I really need this? Or am I just doing this because it's a behavior that's wired in me? That's where it's essential to go into the physiology and listen and be able to go, I don't think I really need this right now, but isn't that interesting that I'm going to it? All right, I'll go for a little bit longer, guys. This is great. Lots of good questions here. I'm going to have a little more water. So all my symptoms started in menopause, extreme anxiety, adrenal issues, panic attacks. Can the program help me? So I have seen this help this cluster of symptoms, and I just talked about that. So it's possible I already answered this after you wrote the question in. So the overarching simple answer is yes. It connects back to what was in our system, the dysregulation that was there. And then, of course, we hit this hormonal shift in life and everything goes into chaos. And this is where these symptomologies can pop up. This is how they can pop up. Okay, I'm not sure what one thing means here, but I'm concerned that brain fog and PEM, I'm not familiar with that abbreviation, PEM will impede me getting the most healing out of SBSM. Post-Exertional Malaise. I see. So extreme fatigue, flu-like symptoms, and other symptoms that are not in proportion to the amount of activity that has been done. So this sort of connects with chronic fatigue and what we might call fibromyalgia. So great question. And brain fog and this post-exertional malaise, from what we know, is connected to dysregulation of the nervous system. So it's kind of this bittersweet question, because in order to move out of that, we need to heal, from my experience, at this nervous system level. And so one of the things that we always say in this program, and we will say it ad nauseum until you get sick of us, here, like you're going to be like, stop saying that. We will say you have to go at your own pace. You have to titrate. You have to be very, very consistent. And if that consistency is just 2 minutes a day or 5 minutes every other day, that's all you need to do. It's about little baby steps. And so I would really encourage you to consider, is that concern, I'm just going to put this out there, having been in this work for as long as I have, I'm not saying this is you, it's just a generality, but sometimes our concern to begin this work is because we know somewhere in our unconscious that we're going to have to change a lot in our life to establish a new way of living that has more regulation on board. And people will, Peter Levine would often say, flee from health. They'll stop the good behaviors because they've only known themselves to be unwell. And that's how people see them. They have identified themselves as not being well, being sick, being chronically ill. And so there's this interesting parallel here as to why we want to go slow, because we want to rewire and change so that our world can change slowly with the healing and the greater health. So the overarching answer is note that there is a concern, and also ask yourself, do I want to get out of this brain fog and this post-exertional malaise? And if you do, then that's the focus that you want to have. So I get stuck in rumination and not standing up for myself in circumstances I couldn't get away from. Is there something we can say to ourselves to get to some peace with it while doing this work? So I'm going to play the assumption card that you will join us with SBSM, or you already are in Smart Body, Smart Mind, or another one of my programs. And when we're ruminating on stuff, one trick that I learned from Peter was to say, I have the thought that this is happening. So I'll give you an example. I might say to myself, oh, I'm never going to get ahead. I'm never going to figure this out. I'm never going to heal. So that's kind of a thought loop. What he has taught us to say is, I have the thought that I'm never going to get better. I'm never going to heal. And that is a slight difference that sort of, it's almost like an NLP trick. It's like, yeah, I just have the thought that that's going to happen. But that thought doesn't mean that that's the reality. And I would say this is where humans, we're really faced with this conundrum, because we have this higher brain cortex that can think and create and innovate and make plays and literature and music. But then we have this survival physiology and this animal physiology that just needs simplicity, right? So sometimes we do have to talk to ourselves in ways that kind of take the burden and the stress off. All right, next question. I'm in my mid-70s. Is it too late for me to change? What do you think? I know it's not. We have people in their 80s doing this course, and they are changing dramatically. So no, it is not. It comes down to your intention, your desire, your belief, and the feeling that you deserve to do this, even in your years of 70s. Here's the thing. A human is supposed to live to about 120. All other animals live 10 times the age in which they can reproduce. And so we typically start to reproduce, or we can reproduce at like age 12, 14. So times that by 10, that's 120 to 140. So this is what I mean by saying that we don't understand as humans how darn stunted we have been in our current world situation with domestication, industrialization, chemicals, poisons, pharmaceuticals, the industry that surrounds us, and the stress that we put ourselves in, and this higher brain that can keep us stunted and frozen. Someone asked my take on multiple sclerosis. Please watch the video that we did yesterday on chronic illness that connects to that. The short answer is it's a degeneration of the nerves. And from what we've seen, and this goes into Gabor Mate's work, I would also refer to The Body Keeps the, no, sorry. When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate, he talks about MS, ALS, and other neurodegenerative conditions. And what we're have seen is that, yes, dysregulation of the nervous system can turn on the switches to degenerate our system, also our nerves. There's a strong connection between repressed anger, rage, and being a people pleaser, always putting other people ahead, always putting the situation ahead of our own personal needs. This actually ties into what I was saying earlier about us needing to take care of our family systems. So it's very important that if we fall into that category, that we get out of that category, because there is some pretty strong research that suggests that type of personality has a preponderance to many cancers and many neurodegenerative diseases. My voice is getting tired. I'm going to have to probably end this Q&A soon. I've been talking for over 90 minutes now. So I'm just going to scan and see if there's any questions that I haven't gotten that fall into a theme that we haven't covered yet. I'm going to try to answer this one. So this person writes, I've heard that insight on behaviors is enough sometimes to change things like addiction. So that's the first part. That's the first statement. I would say that we can change addiction with behavior, but the trouble is that we will be constantly married to that behavior change. And it takes a lot of energy to stay in control of those behaviors, to not go to that addiction. What we want is we want to be able to let go of our control and choose what we need for our body based on our body's physiology, and not on the behavior that's soothing ourselves because we're dysregulated. So this is where addiction, I think I feel that we're on the cusp of really helping folks with addiction, not just be behavior changed and not go to that addictive behavior, but be in a state of not having to manage and cope with the behaviors that they're being drawn to do, hence the addiction. Hope that makes sense. And then the next part is, I wanted to ask if you think it's the same for internal addiction as well, i.e., I lose myself for connection. So this kind of goes back to how we listen to our internal physiology. And when we are able to be more accurate and more perceptive of the real signals coming from our insides, I don't know how to say it any other way, things just get simpler. And this actually ties back to the baby. When a baby is crying, if it isn't met, if its needs aren't met, they are basically living in a constant state of physiological distress. And then when they realize nobody's coming, they go into collapse and shut down. And so they get the cue that my internal physiology is not worth paying attention to. No one's paying attention to me. This is how we start to disconnect. This is also how we don't gain self-regulation as infants and toddlers. And then this is how we become dependent on certain things to soothe us because we can't find internal soothing, internal resourcing. We want to be able to resource without anything from the external doing that. Which for some of us, when we've had to rely on external resources and hobbies and tools and music and things to calm us, that can seem nearly impossible. But that would be what we would consider true, quote unquote, enlightenment, is this ability to go through life and not really need much other than our own physiology and some food and a little connection and a purpose. And that's about it. Right? So we spend a lot of time, and I have no doubt it's $1 trillion industry with coping strategies because of this lack of self-regulation that didn't get born into us due to good co-regulation from our primary caregivers. If you were born via induced labor, is that considered a birth trauma? In my opinion, yes, because it wasn't natural. Someone asked a question about Feldenkrais being similar to DNS, and I don't know what DNS is. So if you want that question answered, if you can offer us a question with more specificity. Yeah, my voice is getting tired. Maybe email us if you don't have a chance. I'm probably not going to be able to get to that. Okay. All right. Couple more. This is about addiction, but a little different. So is it possible to have addiction to being the victim as an adult when you have experienced so many memories throughout your childhood that made you victimized? Yes. 100%. I'm going to read that again because that is such a good statement. Is it possible, and it's a question, is it possible to have addiction to being the victim as an adult when you have experienced so many memories throughout your childhood that made you victimized? Yes. So this comes down to what I spoke of yesterday, and it's kind of old classic research, learned helplessness. So when we are helpless as a child and we realize there's no way out of this, I can't get out of this family system. It's not possible. I got to wait. And I've interviewed people where they knew they just got to figure this out. Until they get out, they're not going to be able to do anything. Some of us just don't have that thought process, and that's not bad. That's not a bad thing. But if we haven't posed this question, we won't realize that everything in our life is mimicking what we grew up with, because it's the only thing we know. We don't know how to get from point A to B in a more regulated, easygoing, curiosity-driven way, because there was never any of that existed when we were growing up. And so we will perpetuate what we know. My mentor, Kathy Kane, says it this way, and I add a little parallel. It's about like the map. Do you have a map to know how to do certain things? And if I were to say to someone, hey, I want you to drive this car. I want you to drive this car from Rome to Florence. Here's a great rental car. Here's a map. Here's some snacks. Here's some money. Heck, I'm even going to give you an automatic transmission because I know it's hard to find them in Europe and you don't know how to drive stick. And I'm making all these assumptions. And then the person looks at you and goes, but I don't even know how to drive. What do you mean automatic standard transmission? I don't know how to read a map. I don't even know how to work a car, let alone go onto a freeway. So that's a really kind of stark example. If we've never gotten into a car and driven a car, it's pretty much impossible to say to someone, I need you to drive this from here to here. Here's everything you need. So when it comes to us healing as adults, Yeah, we're going to have to unpack a lot of the unsafety, a lot of the assumptions about what the world is like. When we were brought up like this, in this case, horrific this victimization and abuse, we have a message that is sent out to not only internally but externally. The world is a dangerous place. No one is to be trusted, and we're probably all going to die because I'm constantly living in terror. And if we can't unpack what that means, we might actually have a life that's pretty decent, but there's this underlying unconscious or maybe some conscious message that's nothing is ever going to be good. I'm always going to be screwed, always going to be in a bad situation. I'm always going to be getting sick, always going to get an accident. And so that intention can actually find us more trouble and more trauma. So yeah, great question statement. Is it possible to be both anxious and lethargic? Yes. So go back to my talk yesterday on chronic illness. That really touches into that. Again, fight, flight, freeze, and then shut down, collapse. This is the bread and butter, the hallmark of chronic illness in current day society and Western society. It is driven by this cycling of our autonomic nervous system being in this fight, flight, freeze, shut down cycle. And so that is where we would have that anxiety, fight, flight, a little bit of freeze, lethargic, collapse, shut down. Someone asked, do you have any information about the connection between this work and autism, specifically high functioning autism? So we don't have any write-ups on that, but I do know that many of our students would classify or have been diagnosed on various spectrums. And I'm thinking about Kay Turner. You might be able to find some of her spoken word on our channel. She is a adult mom, has children who are diagnosed also in the spectrum. And one can say she's just doing great, working her business, her kids are in university, doing well. And so that's a good example of someone who's been diagnosed, is doing this work, is no longer in the symptomology of other forms of chronic pain. She was very unwell when she began this work and is now thriving. So Kay Turner is the name. We can probably find it for you. All right. Common one we get, can one be on medication while doing this program? Can we start? Yeah, many of our folks are on various medications. It just comes down to monitoring. Again, I can't give you medical advice or anything like that. Your dosage. I've worked with clients who are on antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-seizure medications to calm their nerves. And what often occurs is they need less. So it'll be very important for you to monitor all this stuff with your healthcare provider, because you don't want to be stuck in that behavior of what you're used to. As your system finds more regulation, it will shift. Okay. All right, everyone. I'm going to call it for a day. I think my brain is starting to shut down a little bit. I have enjoyed seeing your questions, answering your questions. I know there's a lot of other questions that I haven't gotten to. What I will suggest is to really, again, go back to what I was saying earlier, that these diagnoses, these illnesses, whether it's mental, chronic pain, physical addictions, myself, my colleagues, and this is not new information on the block. This is just information that's very difficult to get up and out. We are seeing a definite connection between these mental illnesses, addictions, and early childhood trauma, adversity, because of the dysregulation in the nervous system. One of the hallmark studies that really showed this was the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences study. I've talked about this a lot. That really showed over a massive population of people. When there is more childhood adversity, the likelihood of chronic illness, mental disorders, addictions, it just skyrockets in adult life. And it comes back to this nervous system functioning and not functioning, not helping the body heal, not being in the body, not being able to connect to what's going on in our physiology. And so a big part of this work is getting better, becoming a master at listening to your physiology so you give it what it needs. And when you start to give your terrain, essentially, this body of yours, what it needs, slowly over time, and this is something that you have to continue doing. It's not something that you just do for 12 weeks and then that's it. It is a lifestyle change. It starts to improve. It starts to flourish. The resiliency starts to grow. And again, it comes back to, and I mentioned this earlier, you got to want it and you have to be able to trust and know that your body wants to heal. And it does. I know that. The physiological system, just like the earth system, it doesn't want to be sick. It doesn't want toxic stress held inside or around us. It wants to be better. We're no different than the planet and the rivers and the oceans. We're a little more complex because of this higher brain. And because of this higher brain, that is what allows us to push forward and keep going, even though we know we've been victimized, and it makes us say, I don't need to stay in that trap. I can push out of this and heal. So that's really one of the key questions you have to ask yourself if you want to do these next level steps to make this a lifestyle. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're open for registration right now for Smart Body, Smart Mind. It's my 12-week curriculum. We run this twice a year, so this is the last time to enroll in 2024. Registration closes on Tuesday. If you have any questions logistically, maybe something that you're still not sure of, one of the better ways to get your question answered is to email support. Our people are there answering questions. My colleagues are there answering your questions. Tomorrow, I'll be doing one more special topic lecture. It is a Zoom call, so you have to sign up for it. And it is all on the importance of working with healthy aggression. It is highlighted towards parents and practitioners, but anyone can join. But we're really going to be speaking about parents and practitioners. Healthy aggression, and I didn't get into it today, this is essential medicine for working with mental illnesses, we might call it chronic illness. It comes back to that fight, flight, and freeze and shutdown being stuck on. When we weren't able to express ourselves or fight back or flee, that energy, that emotion, that survival strategy is still in our system. And when we suppress and hold back our healthy aggression, it is a lot of energy to hold in our body. It takes a lot of metabolic stamina to keep that tiger inside, so to speak. There's a reason why Peter's first book was called Waking the Tiger. It's about waking up the tiger inside of us, that fight energy, that flight energy, and really our life force birthright to express and be boundaried and be who we are. So we'll be talking about that tomorrow. It is on Zoom. Myself and my husband, Seth Lyon, one of my colleagues, he and I will be talking about that same time, 10:30 to midday Pacific time. So if you want to join that, I encourage you to do so. If you can't make it live, we'll send out the recording. Please sign up. We'll put that link somewhere here. It's also on my site under live events. You can find it there. Thank you to my team for popping in links and bringing me the questions here. It has been a pleasure, and I hope you've learned something very important for your healing and your nervous system regulation. Bye for now, everyone. Take good care.